he totally denies it. He says it didn't happen. And, you know, you have to listen to him also. You're talking about, he said 40 years ago this did not happen. So, you know, let me just tell you, Roy Moore denies it. That's all I can say. He denies it. And by the way, he totally denies it. The women are Trump voters. Most of them are Trump voters. All you can do is you have to do what you have to do. He totally denies it.
That was Donald Trump's answer when asked if electing an accused child molester was better than electing a Democrat in next month's U.S. Senate race in Alabama. Trump's defense of Republican Roy Moore, who's accused of sexual misconduct with multiple teenagers when he was a prosecutor in his 30s, is risky given the president's own history of sexual assault allegations. And while it wasn't exactly a rah-rah endorsement, it was enough for Moore to use in a fundraising email to his supporters, writing, "I appreciate Donald Trump for defending my honor and my character." And joining me now, Republican strategist Evan Siegfried, former Breitbart media consultant Kurt Bardella, and Washington Post opinion writer Jennifer Rubin. I'm going to start with you here at the table, Evan. The current polling, which the polling has been all over the place. This is a WBRC strategy research poll dated November 20th, just before Thanksgiving. It has Roy Moore at 47, Doug Jones at 45. How on earth is a man accused serially of essentially being a child molester still up in any poll?
Tribalism. I think it's been this us versus them narrative where we have, as Republicans said, if you don't like a certain piece of news, even though it's factual,
right,
you can ignore it because it's fake news. And it's much more news is based upon opinion than actual facts in this type of a world. And at the same time, I think there are people who say, well, who are making moral justification saying it's better to have Roy Moore who will vote the way we vote, which Mo Brooks said about 2 weeks ago, than having Doug Jones in there. Well, I don't like Doug Jones's policies, but I think he's far better than Roy Moore is. At the same time, you have this poll from JMC Analytics that came out 2 weeks ago that said 29% of voters are more likely to vote for Roy Moore now because of the allegations. And that shows the moral rot within the Republican Party when we're going out and saying we are the party of family values and morality when we're defending a man who's accused of such horrible, disgraceful behavior. It really makes a lot of people have a second to look and say, why do we want to be a part of the Republican Party? Yeah,
and Kurt, you know, you have the enforcer, you know, who isn't really good at elections or politics, but for some reason still seems to have the president dancing on a string, your old friend Steve Bannon. And this is him talking on his radio show on Friday about that race. Take a listen.
And I think that's what the president said. He said, hey, this stuff is all 40 years old. It's all allegations. It's, you know, and let you guys, and like you said, let the people of Alabama decide. And that's why I'm a big believer in. Let the folks in Alabama decide. So it's, I think it's going to be very straightforward. I think the president showed huge courage in the face of just withering criticism.
I agree.
By the pundit class. And I just think it's great.
I think Marlowe is the editor of Breitbart News. So the idea that it is courageous for Donald Trump, who is himself a serially accused sexual assaulter of women, it's courageous for him to stand up for an accused child molester. That is where the far right of the Republican Party is right now. How mainstream is that view in your opinion?
You know, I think that you've seen that it's really not that mainstream. There have been a number of Republicans, you know, in very leadership positions who have spoken out against Roy Moore, who have said that they don't want him to be in Congress, who have floated the idea that they would try to expel him if he indeed won and was seated. So I think, again, this is a very, you know, concentrated group of Republican people who really actually masquerade as Republicans, even though they're really not Republicans. They don't stand for anything. They have no moral compass. They have no values of any kind. They are not guided by any core ideological issue or perspective, much like the president. They go wherever they think they can go. They really exist to agitate, to distract, to disrupt. And what Bannon is doing is it's classic vintage Bannon. It's wherever the establishment is, I don't want to be. It doesn't matter what the issue is. It doesn't matter what the topic is. It's just a matter of I don't want to do anything that aligns me with Mitch McConnell or Paul Ryan or quote-unquote establishment Republicans. And so he does the exact opposite to be contrary to that. And that's what President Trump generally does as well. Anytime you think you know what they'll do, you think that they'll listen to reason, follow common sense, they do the exact opposite, almost just to spite everybody else.
But you know, it's interesting because they don't do that, Jennifer, when it comes to things like, I don't know, cutting taxes for corporations or policies that harm the poor. They're not contrary to the establishment when it comes to things that hurt poor people or women or gay people or people of color. They're right with the establishment and they're fine with them. It's just interesting that they're only against them on things like, you know, whether or not to defend a child molester. Let's listen to another recipient of Robert Mercer and Becca Mercer's money. That would be Kellyanne Conway, whose polling firm used to be supported by them. She's now working for the White House. And here she is on Fox News on Monday talking about the Alabama Senate race.
Doug Jones in Alabama, folks, don't be fooled. He'll be a vote against tax cuts. He's weak on crime, weak on borders. He's strong on raising your taxes. He's terrible for property owners.
So
and Doug Jones is a doctrinaire liberal, which is why he's not saying anything and why the media are trying to boost him.
So vote Roy Moore?
I'm telling you that we want the votes in the Senate to get this tax bill through.
So, yes, vote Roy Moore. I mean, and Jennifer, and the idea that the guy who prosecuted 2 of the Klansmen who blew up the 16th Street Baptist Church and killed 4 little kids in the 1960s is weak on crime is pretty breathtaking.
Well, to quote Ivanka Trump, who I never quote, there's a special place in hell for mothers who defend accused child molesters, and that would be Kellyanne Conway. I have no words to describe how really atrocious, how despicable this is. I do want to differ with Kurt in that he sees this noxious branch of the Republican Party as a segment. Unfortunately, I think that is the Republican Party. You can't kind of pass them off as some fringe group when it's the President of the United States, everybody in the White House, the head of the RNC, the Vice President of the United States. We go down the line. And let's face it, the party has already embrace someone who has been serially accused of sexual assault. That's the president. That's Paul Ryan. That's Mitch McConnell. That's everybody. So listen, to make this distinction that somehow there are good Republicans on this issue and bad Republicans, this is the horror of Donald Trump, which he has infested and deformed an entire national political party. And I think they're rotten to the core now, the whole lot of them.
Yeah, Kurt, I mean, isn't that the case? I mean, the Bannon wing owns the party now. They've taken over. Ideologically, Paul Ryan runs behind the president, you know, like a fan. They're all in lockstep. How can you make a distinction?
Well, and again, I don't disagree with that, Jennifer, at all. I mean, no one's been more vocal about the rotting core that Steve Bannon and Donald Trump have perpetrated amongst the Republican Party than I have. It's why I barely consider myself a Republican at this point and spend almost every week speaking out against them.
You like the weather out here.
But what I was speaking to was more directly the issue of defending a child sex predator. There have been a lot of people who are Republicans who were very quick to speak out against that. And that's not to say what all the other issues that have come out, all the other things that Donald Trump has done, well, they have sat compliantly silent as he's run roughshod over the Republican Party. I said a lot of the Republican Party died the night that Donald Trump was inaugurated, and everyone stood there clapping like a bunch of seals. And you know, it disturbs me. It's incredibly troubling. It's been terrible for this country. But on the issue of just specifically talking about whether you defend Roy Moore or not, there have been a lot of people in Republican leadership positions who have spoken out about that.
But nobody listened to them, and if they were influential within the party, you would see Roy Moore's support completely erode in Alabama.
They've been completely
polling in the
neutered.
teens.
There's no doubt
I think
about
that's
that.
a big problem. The 2 things that I worry about right now are, 1, we've been accused of having a war on women, and this just perpetuates it. And 2, I think there are a lot of Alabama voters who are on the fence, and then they look at the allegations against Al Franken, which are wholly separate, but they see Democrats sticking by him, and to them that's a signal that they can stick by Roy Moore. I think Democrats need to come out much harder against Al Franken, and that would actually help Doug Jones in the long run.
Hold on a second. There is absolutely no symmetry between what Al Franken but Al Franken is not being accused of being a child molester, and I think that's part of the problem. I think the conflation, the whataboutism among Republicans who try to put Roy Moore and Al Franken in the same sentence is part of the reason that your party has no credibility here.
No, I agree with you. There is no similarities between the 2 different accusations.
They don't belong in the same sentence at all.
But
they're not the same in any character at all.
But it's what I'm talking about is how people view it. I don't agree that they're the same at all.
People are insane because there's literally nothing that the
and you know, Democrats have not defended Al Franken. To the contrary, they're all calling. There are some liberal advocacy groups who have called for him to resign. There's an investigation that's pending. I haven't seen Nancy Pelosi come out and say Al Franken's a great guy.
Resulted in an expulsion.
By the way,
1800s.
The idea that Al Franken should be that there is any symmetry whatsoever. These guys are going to serve with Roy Moore if he wins and say absolutely nothing and vote with him and bet. It is absolutely absurd. I'm sorry, my little editorial here. Not even close to being the same. But I appreciate the discussion. Evan Siegfried, Kurt Bardella, thank you very much. Jennifer Rubin will be back. We're not kicking them out. They're just going to not be back
Thanks, Joy.
Still, happy Thanksgiving, you guys. And coming up, Trump and Tiger are raising eyebrows. It's Saturday. I'll tell you why next.
Said if you don't like a certain piece of news, even though it's factual,
right,
you can ignore it because it's fake news. And it's much more news is based upon opinion than actual facts in this type of a world. And at the same time, I think there are people who say, well, who are making moral justification saying it's better to have Roy Moore who will vote the way we vote, which Mo Brooks said about 2 weeks ago, than having
history of sexual assault allegations. And while it wasn't exactly a rah-rah endorsement, it was enough for Moore to use in a fundraising email to his supporters, writing, "I appreciate Donald Trump for defending my honor and my character." And joining me now, Republican strategist Evan Siegfried, former Breitbart media consultant Kurt Bardella, and Washington Post opinion writer Jennifer Rubin. I'm going to start with you here at the table, Evan. The current polling, which the polling is...
He totally denies it. He says it didn't happen. And, you know, you have to listen to him also. You're talking about, he said 40 years ago this did not happen. So, you know, let me just tell you, Roy Moore denies it. That's all I can say. He denies it. And by the way, he totally denies it. The women are Trump voters. Most of them are Trump voters. All you can do is you have to do what you have to do. He totally denies it.
That was Donald Trump's answer when asked if electing an accused child molester was better than electing a Democrat in next month's U.S. Senate race in Alabama. Trump's defense of Republican Roy Moore, who's accused of sexual misconduct with multiple teenagers when he was a prosecutor in his 30s, is risky, given the president's own... He's been all over the place. This is a WBRC strategy research poll dated November 20th, just before Thanksgiving. It has Roy Moore at 47, Doug Jones at 45. How on earth is a man accused serially of essentially being a child molester still up in any poll?
Tribalism. I think it's been this us versus them narrative where we have, as Republicans,